Hi, and welcome to the virtual class of Environmental Studies. This module is divided into three subparts. This is the third and concluding part of the first module. So, let us begin. In the previous session, we looked at why are nature and the environment social sciences issues. In the second session, we engaged with different notions and ideas about development. In this concluding session, I will present and discuss the notion of sustainable development and the debate and contestations surrounding its multiple conceptions and understandings. The most commonly referred definition of sustainable development that you see on your screen comes from a report published in 1987 titled Our Common Future, but also referred as Brundtland Report. Following the Stockholm Conference, which we discussed briefly in the second part, the United Nations had constituted the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1983. Gro Harlem Brundtland, the former Prime Minister of Norway, was the first chairperson of the commission. So the report gave us this well-known definition of sustainable development, which says, to quote, sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, unquote. However, though the concept of sustainable development has gained widespread currency, it remains a contested concept since all big businesses, governments, social reformers, and even environmental activists talk of sustainable development. The question then is whether the term has one single meaning or a range of meanings. In practice, sustainable development is usually presented as the intersection between the environment, society, and economy. The model or the picture that you see on your screen represents these three elements as interconnected rings, which conceives the economy, society, and environment as separate entities. So then, logically, it can also be assumed that trade offs can be made between the three sectors. So, we can focus more on, let's say, economy and have less concern for environment or society or vice versa. Therefore, questions about sustainability of communities and the maintenance of cultural diversity could be sidelined, or it also becomes possible through these trade-offs to embrace technical fixes while ignoring the fact that no amount of genetic engineering can replace the biodiversity. Such approach does not allow us to ask questions that are at the core of sustainable development, that is the nature of our society, what the policy priorities are, how decisions are made, and in whose interest. The political reality of today is that economy dominates decision making. That is the main concern being economic growth or GDP, and inequality in wealth, of power, inequality in education is often justified under the trickle down theory. That means eventually it will happen to each one of us. Using sustainable development as a marketing strategy to create green image, businesses and industry have mainly concentrated on the economic benefits of resource and energy efficiency. But since political reality gives primacy to the economy, it largely treats the environment and society as a resource to be exploited. However, the material reality tells us that economy is dependent on society and the environment. Humans need society to survive, but furthermore, human life itself is dependent on the environment. Our material needs, heat, light, food, medicines, clothing, as well as modern consumer goods are made with materials and energy that comes from the environment. Similarly, products, regardless of whether they are described as waste or as goods, eventually end up returning into the environment. The environment is also the source of much of culture and leisurely enjoyment. Therefore, from material reality perspective, the economy is nested within society, which in turn is nested within the environment. So this shift in emphasis uh, tells us that the in a particular way, the most important point to note here and understand is that the environment would continue without society, but human society needs the environment to survive, right? So from the standpoint of sustainable development, uh, sustainable development is not an optimization problem, right? Rather, it concerns, or rather, it is a way, a framework to look at both environmental issues and socio-economic issues in an integrative way or manner. In the last 300 years, as we had discussed in the first part of this module, the environment has been largely seen as external to humanity, certainly from the days of industrialization, which and the environment is to be is there to be used and exploited. But of course, there are exceptions, but these exceptions are like creating few areas preserved as wilderness or national parks and so on. This particular way of thinking about environment, if you would go by what Francis Bacon, who is one of the founders of modern science, he held that the world is made for man, not man for the world, right? So this particular emphasis on humans being the conquerors, they being the decision makers, and environment being an entity to be exploited, comes from this particular worldview, which if you would notice the text which is sourced from unknown Native American in the picture there, which says, when the blood in your veins returns to the sea and the earth in your bones returns to the ground, perhaps then you will remember that this land does not belong to you, it is you who belong to this land. So, this contrasting worldviews, where communities who have relied on nature and the environment and have worked towards preservation, vis-a-vis our modern industrial highly urbanized culture where the environment is largely seen as something to be used and exploited. This has created a kind of a chasm, or kind of a gap in between how do we understand and think about the environment which sustains our lives. But sustainable development, in a particular way, recognizes the dependency of humans on the environment for their well-being in a much wider sense. Consider the sustainable development goals which we had discussed in the second part. The first priority, or the first goal of the agenda of the sustainable development goals, is end or annihilation of poverty. And this priority, which has been said, also tells us that sustainable development is then just not about environmental issues or environmental preservation, but is also concerned with the questions of socio-economic inequities, which eventually then end up creating environmental degradation. So India is now, as you would have recently read, India is now the most populous country in the world, and sustainable development goals are even more urgent for us. We need to address issues of inequality in education and employment, while avoiding the path of environmental destruction and degradation that will affect future generations, or, if I may say, is already affecting our current generations. If you go by the recent development that have happened over the last decade, including those polluted cities, landslides and floodings, and several other calamities in and around the world, but also specifically in India too. The idea or the concept of sustainable development essentially brings together socio-economic concerns and environmental issues. So sustainable development doesn't treat these issues as separate domains, but rather looks at them in an integrative way. Sustainable development questions the idea that human well-being can be achieved through increased global trade and industry and so on and on. The post-war years have proved that no policies offer any real hope of narrowing the growing gap between rich and poor nations. So what sustainable development does is that it calls for a different form of growth, the development as a means to eradicate poverty, development which meets human needs, and development which ensures that all get a fair share of resources. This is in a sense the social justice component of sustainable development. So it's not solely focused and concentrated on environmental issues, but it is also not solely something about GDP growth and so on, but rather a kind of a midpoint or a midway where there has to be a in a particular way balance and the needs of the majority of poor communities are taken into care. So therefore sustainable development not only cares for social justice in the present but also in the future, and social justice is a crucial component of the concept of sustainable development. uh, but just as when we said sustainable development is widely used term or rather a framework, there is no consensus about how to address both environmental and socio-economic questions together. So we do realize and we do accept, many of the stakeholders agree that these problems are there and they continue to persist, but there is no consensus on what are the ways in which we can address this problem together. The Brundtland report attempted to bridge some of these debates, yet if you are reading the text on your slide, yet sustainability is laden with so many definitions that it risks plunging into meaninglessness. For example, ambiguity of the Brundtland report allows businesses and governments to be in favor of sustainability, but without any fundamental challenge to their present course or business as usual. As long as you have high energy efficient LED bulb, or you have, let's say, Bharat 6 stage 6 certified car, it's okay. But we also don't go a step further and question whether it is necessary to promote a certain mode of transportation which heavily depends on each person owning a vehicle vis-a-vis, let's say, public transportation which serves the public in general, while reducing the amount of pollution that n number of vehicles kind of are responsible for on the road. So what we then have are multiple views pertaining to the idea of sustainability or sustainable development. One particular view or other ideas to club together is what's called weak sustainability. Weak sustainability sees natural and manufactured capital as interchangeable, with an emphasis that technology can address the problems of the environment. So if in a particular way, if we have to look at it, so there are technical fixes and technocratic solutions. So if there is more of a greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, what we can do, let's say what engineers would suggest us, that let's have carbon capture and carbon storage. That is one way of thinking about claims about weak sustainability. Or let's say if there is air pollution outside, we can use air purifiers at our home and have a perfectly non-polluted air and so on. Strong sustainability views, on the other hand, holds that human-made capital cannot replace multitude of processes vital to human existence. For example, ozone layer or photosynthesis. These are some things that the nature is most efficient at and really adapted to. No matter how much amount of innovations we might be able to create, we can't replace these natural processes. There is of course then very extreme view which goes far away from weak and strong claims about sustainability. For example, deep greens, they hold that non-human species natural systems have rights and values in themselves. So just as humans have right to life here, so is the case with other natural systems and non-human species. But these debates are mainly concerned with environmental issues, and they do not take into account socio-economic consequences, and that's the difference. In contrast, the concept of sustainable development is the result of the growing awareness of the global links between mounting environmental problems on the one hand and socio-economic issues to do with poverty and equality on the other hand. So this concerns about healthy future and humanity, but at the same time preservation of the environment, come together to give rise to the framework of sustainable development. But the problem then is we have these multiple views, and we would require perhaps a set of principles or axioms or certain assumptions to decide how do we conceptualize the idea of sustainable development. In 1999, Horton in his paper gave 5 principles of equity for sustainable development. So this so to and these are aimed at combining concerns with the environment and socio-economic issues. So this principle, the first principle of futurity or the intergenerational equity, takes into account the need of the future generations which are yet to be born, which are not yet there, but we need to have sufficient and environmental resources preserved so that they can live their life in a normal manner without any challenge to their health or without any challenge to their livelihood. Social justice on the or the intergenerational equity rather focuses on the current generation and recognizes that the current and present inequities created by the stratification like gender, class, caste, religion, these need to be addressed, and these are the causes, underlying causes for the social injustice which needs to be taken care of. The third principle of transfrontier responsibility or geographical equity advocates that local policies should be such that or should be geared towards resolving both global as well as local environmental problems. So it should not be like we are resolving a particular environmental problem right here in the locality, but it ends up creating another set of disasters or another set of environmental problems globally at other places. Procedural equity, the fourth principle, holds that the regulatory and participatory system should ensure that all people are treated openly and fairly. It advocates participation so that people are able to shape their own future. So people who live in the vicinity, let's say indigenous people or tribals who live in the forest, must have say in how they would like forests to be preserved, or if at all there is some kind of a development, road building or any infrastructure activity, the shape, size, design, and what are the routes these roads the road must traverse. This needs to be decided by the local affected communities than somebody who makes decision away from these localities. And the final principle, which is about interspecies equity, recognizes the importance of biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. So it places survival of other species on an equal basis to the survival of humans. So it recognizes that it's not just we humans that count, but also this entire complex ecosystem within which humans live. We are part of the environment. So as we just looked at these 5 different principles, and we in the previous slide we also had a look at different perspectives about thinking about environmental issues, weak sustainability, strong sustainability, or even deep greens. So these are multiple views, and not only just multiple views about problems concerning environment or socio-economic concerns, but these multiple views also create contestation about the idea of sustainable developments, and that gives rise to its different interpretations, which are then confusing. So the paper by Bill Hopwood, Mary Miller, and Jeff O'Brien, which is also the prescribed reading for your uh, for this module and also for your exams, offers us a mapping of different conceptions of sustainable development, which attempting to combine environmental and socio-economic issues. So this map highlights various approaches and their political frameworks and their attitude towards change and means of change. So what you see there on the y-axis covers the level of importance given to human well-being and equality, and the x-axis covers the priority of the environment from low environmental concerns through techno-centered to eco-centered. The shaded gray area that you see on that map indicates the range of views within the sustainable development debates, as in the debate which takes into account both environmental issues as well as socio-economic issues. So there are the areas beyond this shaded region either only talk about environmental issues and they are only concerned with environmental issues, let's say deep ecology, or on the other way around, they are only concerned with socio-economic concerns and they do not focus on environmental issues. So as shown in this map, there are also three broadly overlaid views on the nature of the changes that are required or are necessary in society's political and economic structures and human environment relationships to achieve sustainable development. So what we see here is three different regions: status quo, reform, and transformation, as as a particular mechanism for changing the political, socio-economic structure of the society in order to move towards sustainable development. So these three approaches that we just saw in the map or diagram in the previous slide, the first one being a status quo. The proponents of status quo recognize the need for change but disagree with the view that the environment or society are facing any grave danger. So there are issues but they are not grave, they can be addressed easily, so there can be technical fixes, and hence no fundamental changes to society means means of decision making or power relation is required. So the things as it is are okay from this perspective. Their solution to the ongoing problem is to have more economic growth, and accordingly business and the market are the best means to achieve sustainable development, and they see no role of government, laws and regulation in achieving sustainable development. Their mantra is increase information, changing values, improved management techniques, and new technology innovations by market will help sustainable development. So the supporters of the status quo have a weak commitment to environmental sustainability and weak or no concern with poverty and the lack of equity in political power. On the other hand, if you go to the second approach, proponents of reform accept that there are mounting problems. They are also critical of current policies of most of businesses and governments, but they also do not agree that the fundamental change in society is necessary or that a collapse in ecological or social system is likely to happen in the near term or near future. They instead locate the problem or identify problem in the imbalances and a lack of knowledge and information. So according to them, the solution is to persuade governments and international organizations to initiate major reforms. So compared to status quo, they do believe that governments and international organizations are the key. So this group is largely dominated by academics and mainstream NGO expert. But reformers recognize that government, as I said, has a key role in moving towards sustainable development, and more importantly, the present business as usual is no longer feasible and advisable. So the common belief among reform supporters is that the new technologies will provide wider economic and social benefits for humanity, as well as protecting the environment. So technology or new technologies becomes a central focus. But interestingly, while the Brundtland report is broadly reformist in its, it rather more or less leans towards the status quo if you read their proposed details. It's as I said, it is already ambiguous. The third approach, which is transformation, the supporters of transformation believe that reform is not enough, as problems are located in the economic and power structure of the society. So it's not just a local environmental issue or a problem, but larger problem associated with our socio-economic structures. So they hold that transformation of human relations with the environment is necessary condition to achieve sustainable development. Transformationists argue for social and political action involving those outside the centers of power, such as indigenous groups, the poor, women, and so on and on. So for them, the fundamental problem is the exploitation of most people and the environment by a small minority of people. So by locating this particular problem, that the problems about the environment are located with the exploitation of the majority masses by a small minority, they allow, or they ask us to rather change the economic and power structure of the society. But some transformationists are not concerned with sustainable development. For example, say deep ecologists. In general, though, a transformation view of sustainable development has a strong commitment to social equity, and this is something that we need to appreciate compared to, say, people who the approaches for status quo. So they argue that lack of control over lives and resources leads people to inequality, and environmental degradation thus are inevitable. Chipko movement for environmental justice could be seen as an example of a transformationist approach. So, having seen these, having started with the definition of sustainable development, different ways of thinking about environmental issues, different ways of thinking about socio-economic concerns, and the kind of a map that we just discussed over the last 3-4 slides, what we know is this: there are major debates as to the nature of sustainable development, the changes necessary, and the tools and actors for these changes. So there is no, in a particular way, consensus about the idea or the concept of sustainable development. People use the same word, that is sustainable development, to mean a wide divergence of views on the goals, routes, and methods of moving towards sustainable development. But the question is, can we continue as we are, like the claim of status quo supporters? At present, the status quo view dominates policy. The phrase of sustainable development is used to continue with and justify business as usual, which, as we discussed in the first and second part also, is untenable, unfeasible. But the usual model for sustainable development, that is the three separate but connected rings of the environment, society, economy, does not hold. As we already saw, through, instead of political reality, we have to start reading through the material reality. The reality is that humanity is dependent on the environment, with society existing within and dependent on the environment, and the economy exists within society. So in conclusion, sustainable development will require more than technical changes at the end of the pipe, or modifications to cost and benefit analysis. Thank you very much for your attention. This is the reference paper that I have used for this particular subpart, but this is also your prescribed reading for this module and for your examinations. This is the end of the third part of the first module. Thank you.